What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Your boy IronAngel, and in this video, well, you can see it from the thumbnail title, I really want to learn who this character is. Now, quick backstory, I did read a lot of comics, mostly DC, I read both, but mostly DC, and then when it comes to anime, like mangas, I read Dragon Ball, Yu-Gi-Oh! But I read a lot of DC more than anything. But I don't know much of Peacemaker. I'm not even going to sit here and be that person like, yeah, I know who Peacemaker is. Oh, look at this. Look, I remember this. I don't remember much. I remember some images of him, but I put him in them other superhero categories where he was there and then he wasn't and I forgot about him. And he did nothing that I can remember that was memorable. Now, in my defense, I haven't read comics as much as I used to like I did in my teenage years. In my teenage years, I mean, front to back to front, I read almost every comic book, whether they was good, great, bad, or terrible. So maybe I just forgot. But after seeing him in Suicide Squad, then he had his own TV show, which I didn't watch yet. But now he's a character in a Mortal Kombat game. And see how he acts. But then I saw a picture of him, like a comic picture recently, and he had a serious look. Like, he looked serious. And so it made me question. I was like, dang, so is he a serious character in the comics and they made him a comedic relief in the TV show or what? And like you see in the video game, I didn't know. So I was like, instead of trying to guess, let me look it up myself. And there's a perfect video for it that I've bumped into, which is from Variant Comics and the history of Peacemaker. The video's not even that long, and hopefully I can get more than likely I'm gonna get the answers I need here. So instead of assuming, we can figure it out right now. So let's go ahead and look right into it. Let me lower this real quick. Shout out to Variant Comics. Let me make sure I give you the like now. But yeah, they got other ones too. Origin of Bloodsport. Interesting. All right, but I want to see this. I want to see this and learn more about Peacemaker for myself. All right, thank y'all for tuning in. Actually, I want to know his origins because I can't watch his TV show if I wanted to know a little bit more of Peacemaker, but I wanted to know his origin, where he started from, and hopefully this will have it. All right.
What's up, my comic comrades? Today we continue our series on characters appearing in the Suicide Squad movie by breaking down the history of Peacemaker. The movie, of course, hasn't officially released yet, but based on everything we've seen so far of John Cena's live-action version of Peacemaker, he will likely be one of the breakout characters in the film. In fact, Warner Brothers and DC have already wrapped on the first season of a Peacemaker live-action TV series for HBO Max, also written and directed by James Gunn, with John Cena reprising the role.
Oh,
so clearly
James
the
Gunn
studio thinks
made
the
that
character
one.
is going to be popular as well. I also love how much John Cena enjoys being Peacemaker and how they're using him to market the movie. Basically, every time he does promotion for the Suicide Squad,
He was a
he's
good
in
piece
his
for the
Peacemaker
Suicide Squad
costume.
movie.
It's
Can't even
hilarious
front.
and brilliant.
Wasn't a
Anyway,
great
today we're gonna
movie,
take a
but
look
it
through
was,
the pages of
it
DC
was
Comics
good,
to break
and
down
he was one of the
Peacemaker's
good
history
factors in
before
it.
we see what James Gunn and John Cena have done with him. And for those of you wondering, we will also be giving you Bloodsport's comic book origin on Friday to go along with the official US release of the movie. So make sure to keep an eye out for that one. But before we dive into Peacemaker's history, we want to thank Keeps for sponsoring today's episode. .com/Variant Comics. But with that covered, let's talk some Peacemaker.
I like the setup
Peacemaker
here.
first
I've
appeared
never
in
been on
Fighting
this
5
channel
issue
before.
40 in November of 1966. He was created by Joe Gill and
Wait,
Pat
what?
Boyette. What's crazy about
that long ago? He's been around that long? 1966? Maybe I misheard.
Peacemaker first appeared in Fighting 5 issue 40 in November of 1966. He was created by Joe Gill and Pat Boyette. What's crazy about Peacemaker is he wasn't originally a DC character. He originally belonged to Charlton Comics, first appearing as a backup story in Fighting 5 issue 40, as I just mentioned. The backup story became so popular he was then given his own comic series, which lasted 5 issues. Peacemaker almost instantly became one of Charlton Comics' biggest superheroes. But like lots of comic book fans know, Charlton Comics wouldn't last long, and many of their characters were bought up by DC Comics, including the Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, Question,
I
and
didn't
of
know
course,
that.
Peacemaker. Now being owned by DC Comics, DC would introduce Peacemaker through their story Crisis on Infinite Earths, making his DC Comics debut in Crisis on Infinite Earths issue 6 in 1985. As I'm sure many of you are aware, that Crisis on Infinite Earths was this massive event that destroyed DC's multiverse.
That's crazy. I did not know
resetting and
Peacemaker's been around for a
continuity
while,
DC.
way before
One of the
me.
new changes was the addition
My
of
dad
Charlton
was born in
characters that were
66.
revealed to have existed on Earth 4. The Charlton characters, including Peacemaker, were then given slightly different new origins. And speaking of origins, it's time to talk about Peacemakers.
That's cool. I didn't know about the other ones. Question, Blue
Let's
Beetle,
start with Peacemaker's
Adam.
original Charlton Comics origin, and then we'll talk
Captain
about his
Adam.
modern origin from DC Comics. Peacemaker's real name is Christopher Smith. He grew up an only child, and his father was an army officer and his mother was a research scientist. Because of this, he inherited traits from both of his parents, getting his fighter pilot skills from his dad and his interest in science from his mother. When Smith was an adult, he became a pacifist diplomat who worked as a U.S. peace envoy for the Geneva Arms Conference. In Fighting 5 issue 40, we learned that Chris was trying to stop the international madman and terrorist named Bork, who was rumored to illegally be selling weapons to other nations to instigate border wars in South America. After having a polite conversation with Bork at a dinner party, Chris realizes that diplomacy will not stop him. Smith then tells his secretary, Bork will use assassins, saboteurs, bribery, and other methods to achieve his ends. I only have adequate diplomatic and legal machinery to stop him. Later on that night at Christopher Smith's private retreat high in the Swiss Alps, as the comic says, Chris tells himself, Bork is unscrupulous. I have used every means at my disposal to foil his plans. I detest violence, but because of my inadequacy, thousands of innocent people may die. I must do what I have sworn never to do.
This is definitely a different Peacemaker from the movies.
As Chris heads into the great cellars, there is a thick steel door.
Completely different
No man
outside
except
the
Christopher
suit.
Smith has ever been in the room beyond it. Inside it, we see an arsenal of the most potent weapons ever devised by man. He has designed all of them, but as a man dedicated to peace and nonviolence, Christopher Smith has sworn never to use any of them. Let's pause right there for a second because Chris hates violence, yet he designed some of the deadliest weapons on Earth. Just kind of weird, but hey, comic books. Anyway, Chris goes on to say while picking up a gun, if Bork is permitted to continue, he will involve half the world in his senseless wars. He must be stopped. I cannot succeed with peaceful methods. I've resisted taking the step, but in this case, violence must be met with violence. Although violence is against everything I stand for, there is no other solution. And he says this as he changes into his Peacemaker costume. As we see him put on the costume, a caption in the comic says, and so, although Christopher Smith has sworn never to use these implements of violence, he reluctantly assumes the role of the Peacemaker. A role he resolves he will only take when there is no other recourse, when violence can only be stopped by violent action.
I wonder why they didn't make a movie
like that,
of
now as Peacemaker uses
like
violence
this
and brute
before the
force
John
to
Cena
stop
one.
Bork once and for all. Now
I
that's
didn't think it was
Charlton
gonna
Comics'
work.
origin for Peacemaker, but now let's see how DC tweaked his origin. Peacemaker was introduced into the DC universe during Crisis on Infinite Earths. He was given a new origin and name. Well, new last name as he was now Christopher Smith. He was the only child of Wolfgang Schmidt and Elizabeth Lewis. His father was a munitions manufacturer and his mother was a children's author. However, there was one big twist in DC's origin of Peacemaker. Chris's dad was revealed to be a Nazi officer in the Nazi elite SS Corps, who was responsible for the deaths of 50,000 innocent people. Knowing
Dang.
Wolfgang was going to be caught and arrested, he killed himself in front of Chris on his 5th birthday.
Goodness
not
gracious.
traumatizing at all. After this, his mother Elizabeth quickly relocated both of them and legally changed their last name to Smith so no one would
Goodness
associate
gracious.
them with Wolfgang, giving us his original Charlton Comics name, Christopher Smith. When Chris turned 18, he entered the military, which seemed good for him. Christopher soon became one of the military's best soldiers. Chris soon led a scouting mission to a small village that was expected of harboring enemy troops. Once there, Chris decided it would be a great idea to start opening fire upon the entire village, killing innocent women and children. Because of this, he was court-martialed and sentenced to life in prison. While in prison, Chris was offered a pardon if he joined Project Peacemaker, which was a top-secret, high-tech, independent anti-terrorist squad. Of course, he took it, but several months in, the program was shut down. Christopher was then able to walk off the base without being caught. About a year later, Chris decided to do what the Peacemaker program taught him to do, and that's fight off terrorism. So he took the Peacemaker name for himself and became the costume vigilante Peacemaker. As the vigilante Peacemaker, Chris became more and more violent. He then started hearing the voice of his dead father Wolfgang and started
Okay,
to
now
believe that the
sounds like the Peacemaker of now, where the violence, how violent he is. I'm hoping that there's some kind of relations to his attitude, like his jokey, I always call it like Deadpool style. Well, not as good as Deadpool, but you know what I mean, just that attitude. I'm wondering, is it going to, anything in the comics relate to that, or did DC change it when they made him put him in the movies?
souls of the people that died due to terrorism lived in his helmet and were pushing him towards more violence and retribution. Basically, Chris loved peace so much he was willing to kill for it by any and all means necessary. But even more recently for Peacemaker, in the current Suicide Squad title, which is only 5 issues in at the time of shooting this video, it appears DC has gone back to Peacemaker's original Charlton Comics origin. In 2021 Suicide Squad title, issue 2 to be exact, we see Peacemaker briefly recount his origin on the first 2 pages. Peacemaker tells us as follows: Arkham Asylum, mission report, current status, FUBAR. My name is Christopher Smith. I used to be a diplomat. I came to DC in pursuit of one thing and only one thing: peace. And when I couldn't find it, my new life began. Peacemaker isn't just a name, it's my mission. Whatever it takes, whatever the cost. Waller threw me into her hellhole prison on some trumped up charges, made me the leader of the Suicide Squad. I'm grateful she has the same mission as mine. As I said earlier, judging by Chris's own recap of his origin, it seems very apparent that DC has gone back to the original Charlton Comics origin for the character. We even see a picture of him in a suit on the first page, looking very reminiscent of how he looked in the Fighting 5 issue when he first was introduced, standing in front of the Capitol building. But just like that, my comic comrades, you now know Peacemaker's origin and how it's evolved over the years. So now let's move on to story arcs and publication history.
Okay. Honestly, that was a nice amount of information right there. So they did tweak how he is a little bit in the movies. But, I mean, I'm not saying that was a bad thing. But I ain't gonna front. That storyline of Peacemaker, the one they showed before and the little one that was tweaked when they went to DC, I'll be down to see that kind of movie. I mean, obviously, they might have to change it with the actor. Like, if they remake DC with the whole James Gunn situation, now that James Gunn's changed some things, even though I did hear that the Peacemaker of that Suicide Squad, aka John Cena, is going to be in James Gunn's universe. I don't know how much of that is true, but if they do remake John Cena's character and make a whole new Peacemaker, I am down for a movie of that. It's dark, but it's interesting, and it's more serious. And, you know, I like that serious tone of DC.
Have that many stories in comics. He has his original 5-issue series from Charlton Comics, which essentially just follows him around the world taking down terrorists. And he uses as much violence needed to keep the peace. It's probably the most important series for the character, as it established all the core aspects of Peacemaker we know today. Then years later, Peacemaker would be acquired by DC, as I mentioned earlier, and introduced via the Crisis on Infinite Earth storyline. Although this introduced him to the DC universe, he didn't play a big role in the series at all. But we do see him fighting the Anti-Monitor Shadow Demons.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying. I saw him
in 1987.
Little pieces
and in
back in the day.
Peacemaker tracks down terrorists to their latest target, an airport in France. But like in all Peacemaker comics, his obsession with keeping the peace by any means necessary keeps growing and growing to the point where Chris's family begins to worry that the mission may cost him his sanity. This ultimately causes him to come into a confrontation with the villain, Dr. Zinzin. And while he's fighting the villain and his men, he's also fighting the ghost of his father, which still haunts him every single moment. Like, he literally sees him as a ghost constantly haunting him throughout this series. Then, of course, by the 4th and final issue, Peacemaker stops Dr. Zinzin from starting a global war while simultaneously overcoming his own demons, like his ghost father. Peacemaker would appear in other series and events here and there throughout his history, but let's skip to his most modern interpretation in 2021's Suicide Squad title. In this series, Amanda Waller has made him the leader of the Suicide Squad. He looks much more
serious there than John Cena's version.
Are tasked to capture the Talon and bring him to Amanda Waller. We actually covered the first 2 issues of the Suicide Squad series, so if you want to check that out, you can do so right here. The 2021 Suicide Squad title also gives us the updated origin of Bloodsport, but like I said earlier, we'll be talking about that on Friday. Right now, it's time to take a look at Peacemaker's powers and abilities.
Yeah, I like that character. I like how he
looks. Peacemaker is just a normal human, so he doesn't have any powers like super strength, speed, flight, or any of that stuff. But nonetheless, he does possess the physical strength and stamina of someone who does extreme physical exercise. So John Cena was perfect casting. He's also a master of various forms of hand-to-hand combat and a very skilled gymnast. Being a highly decorated soldier, he's also an expert marksman, great pilot, and proficient in most weaponry. As for equipment, which helps him out when he's doing his vigilante thing, his costume is made of a thin body armor developed by himself. His helmet, which looks hilarious looking like a silver toilet bowl, is actually high-tech. In the comics, it's heat and pressure proof and contains sophisticated cybernetic circuitry that allows him to operate various devices, like an all-band radio, ultrasonic blaster, surveillance devices, and even a laser. His right glove even has a tiny vial in it that when it's crushed, it becomes a fireball. Peacemaker also has a jetpack, which he uses quite often in the comics and was introduced to us in his first appearance at Charlton. As for his favorite weapon, that would be guns, any and all guns, and he carries his favorite one on his right side. But now that you have an overview of Peacemaker's powers and abilities, let's take a look at some reading recommendations.
His character is interesting.
Check out Fighting
Personally,
5
I want to get to know it more. I want to actually read
Peacemaker's
some of these
5-issue Charlton Comics series, his 1987 4-issue series, and the newest series Peacemaker is in, the 2021 Suicide Squad title. That should be enough to get you all started.
All right.
First up for the week of the 4th, we have Justice League issue 66, United Order Part 3. The Hall of Justice has been invaded by a cosmic threat, and it will take the full force of the United Planets led by Superman to defeat it without destroying Earth in the process. Now we have Avengers issue 47, World War
he's just sharing different comics to buy. But yeah, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that kind of storyline from Peacemaker, and I didn't know he was around that long. 66, I think he said. My dad was born in 60s. Yeah, That's a wow. Personally, I thought he was like one of the 80s comic characters, because I did, when they show when he went to DC and they show one of the comics in the 80s, I remember one of them artwork pictures from a comic I read a long time ago. I'm not even gonna say I remember that character. I really don't. I saw a picture of him and didn't remember a thing outside of that. That's why when Suicide Squad was announced and they showed him, I didn't know if that was an actual character or someone they just made up. And yeah, Peacemaker been around, bro. And shout out to John Cena. He's made the character his own. Honestly, he literally made the character his own, because I will say, from what I'm seeing here, obviously I haven't read the comics yet, but from what I'm seeing here, he's more serious than John Cena's version. Not that John Cena's not serious at all. I mean, I've seen Suicide Squad. He had serious moments. I haven't seen the TV show, but I don't know how he is on that one. And in Mortal Kombat, he looks goofy. But yeah, this one don't look like he's meant to be played with. But I personally would like to see, if James Gunn is changing everything with DC and just starting over, I would like to see this version of Peacemaker in the movie. Not that John Cena's is bad. I'm not saying it's bad at all. I think he played the role the way he wanted to. Like, he gave his take on it. But this one's very interesting. But let me know what you think, and I'm glad I watched this. Shout out to Variant Comics. I'll put the original video in the description below. But thank y'all so much for tuning in and for learning Peacemaker with me. And if it's something else I missed about him, let me know in the comments below. But I'll check y'all later. See ya.